Wow, this is an amazing opportunity for me, not just to get away from Houston and DC weather to experience this amazing, glorious weather in New Mexico, but to get to meet all of you, let alone have you as an audience, and have Wayne Hale introduce me. Seriously? How did I get here? So, in September last year, I launched to the space station, and as you can imagine, that was an amazing opportunity. Frankly, it was a very challenging thing for me to adapt to that space environment, much more than I expected. But I'm not here to talk about my personal experience in space as much as I'm going to use that launch date as the start point for a year of what we've been doing in space, because frankly, I was in space for almost half of that year. The first point I want to make is that the International Space Station program is very, very robust. And because it's so robust, it's got lots and lots of commercial opportunities. Of course, you're all very aware of the most successful commercial opportunity we've had so far, being the cargo transport to the space station on US commercial vehicles. When I first got to the space station, SpaceX's 12th mission was already there, and we were very, very busy trying to get it packed up so that it could return payloads back to the Earth. Short time after that, Northrop Grumman's 8th cargo mission arrived at the space station, providing payloads. I'll never forget the popsicles that showed up, as well as the badly needed capability to get rid of tons of trash on the space station. When SpaceX's 13th cargo mission arrived at the space station, I got to be the person operating that robotic arm to reach out and grab the Dragon spacecraft. I'm very happy to report I did not mess it up. And I'm very grateful that the spacecraft stayed at exactly the right spot. It was very, very stable. After that, my time on the space station was done. Within that same year after I launched, there was continuing cargo missions, of course. There was 2 more Northrop Grumman spacecraft arriving, 1 more SpaceX spacecraft. All of that was in the context where we had the Russians also doing missions. So there's 4 cargo spacecraft arriving at the space station from Russia, those Progress spacecraft that are pictured up there, as well as, of course, delivering crews 4 times in a year. So I just wanted, for me, it was kind of enlightening. I knew about this, but looking at this picture, it really gives you a sense in 1 year of all the things that are going on just with transport to and from the space station. And I really want to highlight the commercial transport because now the United States is the leader in commercial launch. In fact, at 57% of the global market, we have more commercial launch than the rest of the world combined. So it's a very big success for us. And that ability to receive visiting vehicles from the United States, transporting cargo to the space station, is going to happen for the long term. As was mentioned, we had spacewalks on the space station while we were there. In fact, 5 of them. All 5 of them had something to do with maintaining or repairing that robotic arm so it can continue to reach out and grab those visiting vehicles. Bigelow's beam module is now on the space station for the long term. You've probably seen pictures like this before where you see all 6 crew members on board. Well, unlikely to see pictures like that in the future because while I was on board, we loaded up beam with cargo for the long term. Now, that crew that you see there, who are the only 3 crew members that are on the space station until tomorrow, or tonight, tomorrow morning probably, actually they're going to take a couple days to arrive, so it's going to be 3 days or so. So those 3 crew members were part of the crew that modified the inside of beam so that we can now have beam certified to not just be berthed to the space station for a couple years like was originally planned, but now it's going to be up there for the life of the space station. There's also been a big increase on the science happening on the space station, largely because the ground control teams did a fantastic job of getting everything in order, making all the plans, getting all the resources lined up. And the fact that while I was on board, we had 4 U.S. operating segment crew members. We were able to set a record for the utilization hours that the crew dedicated to science in 1 week at 109 hours. That's something we were fighting for 30 hours not too long ago. That's a big deal. Now we've also got more than 30 implementation partners that are helping companies get their research and development projects onto the space station, and now those companies are bringing in other customers. So that's a big success. Commercial transport of people to the space station is getting very exciting. Both Boeing's Starliner and SpaceX's Crew Dragon announced their first crews very recently. In fact, if you look in the center, you can see our first commercial astronaut assigned to a crew, Boeing's Chris Ferguson. We're expecting SpaceX to deliver its crew to the space station in June of 2019, coming up very quickly, I hope. And Boeing delivering its first crew to the space station in August of 2019. So there's a lot of exciting stuff coming up there too. Now, before I continue on past all these really exciting things in the short term and start talking about longer term things, I want to talk about low Earth orbit a little bit longer. Because as we're planning on going further away from low Earth orbit, it's essential that we maintain the capability to do operations in low Earth orbit. Of course, it's still a science platform, but NASA has to be able to use that relatively inexpensive place to understand how to have really the best possible life support systems. It's a great place to test those life support systems. As we plan to have astronauts travel farther and farther away from the Earth on longer and longer trips, this low Earth orbit can continue to be a fantastic training ground for those astronauts. I love the idea of sending people on a trip to the space station instead of a Knowles trip, for example, if sometime we get to that. It's essential that we keep that capability in low Earth orbit, but NASA can't do it all. We can't get further away and continue to have this capability in low Earth orbit unless we've got very robust business models happening. So it's in low Earth orbit. It's in NASA's best interest to be one of many customers and not be the purchaser, owner, and operator of all these capabilities in low Earth orbit. So we really, really want, as a NASA person, we really want to get success in low Earth orbit for businesses. Now a lot's changed, and now going into what's positive about our exploration as we get further out of low Earth orbit. First thing was in December of 2017, the President signed Space Policy Directive 1, directing us to go back to the moon for long-term utilization and exploration. Those are all important words, long-term utilization and exploration. And then Space Policy Directive 2 came out after that, and that encourages us to get the legislative environment appropriate to support business models in low Earth orbit, so that's another important piece of administration. NASA submitted, I think it was September 20th, NASA gave its exploration campaign document to Congress. That document has been getting a lot of attention. At the same time, just a couple weeks ago, at the same time, Jim Bridenstine was giving testimony to a Senate subcommittee. Bill Gerstenmaier and 3 center directors from NASA's human space flight centers were giving testimony to a House subcommittee. All of that was discussing this exploration campaign, and it was very well received. There were very positive events. So we're going to go to the moon, and I'm really happy about this. Frankly, I was always a little skeptical about the idea that we're going to skip the moon and head straight to Mars, because I see the moon, even if we weren't talking about the scientific interest on what we can learn about the moon is a fantastic place for us to buy down risk on our eventual travels to Mars. If we're going to go to Mars, we've got to travel long distances in the deep space environment. On the moon, unlike the Earth, where we're inside the Van Allen belts and we're protected from the radiation of deep space, much like low Earth orbit, inside those Van Allen belts is protected from the deep space environment. I have a question. Is that 10 minutes till question and answer starts, or 10 minutes till I'm done? Okay, I'm going to speed this up. So apparently my intro was too fast or too long. So bottom line is we got to get to the moon. We got to buy down that risk with by doing sustained operations on the moon. We're going to learn how to operate in the deep space environment. By doing sustained operations on the moon, we're going to learn how to operate and have engineering solutions for operating on the surface. There's dirt there, unlike on the space station where it's a relatively clean environment. On Mars, we're going to have to do the same thing. It's a stepping stone to Mars. Also, being very far away from the logistics train of very robust logistics chain on the Earth and in low Earth orbit. When we go to Mars, going to the moon, that'll give us an opportunity to do on-site resource utilization. So we'll learn how to have that capability to be more Earth independent. Orion and SLS will get human beings to a lunar orbit by 2023 with crews of 4 for 21-day missions. We'll get Gateway into a lunar orbit, and it will provide support for getting lunar landers to more of the lunar surface than we've ever had the ability to do before because the Gateway's orbit's changeable. At the same time, the Gateway will give us the opportunity to learn how living organisms, not necessarily humans, but living organisms, react to that deep space environment, as well as provide a platform for development of spacecraft transit vehicles to get from Earth to the moon someday. By 2026, we're going to put a human-rated lander test on the moon, and by 2029, we'll actually have humans going to the moon. The 2020, that ascent module, we want that to be reusable. And because it's reusable, not necessarily because it's reusable, but one of the capabilities we want it to have is to be able to abort at any time during its descent. So part of the benefit of having this more robust ascent vehicle is that it's pretty close to what we need to launch off of Mars. So that's a good thing too. We'll be accidentally developing a spacecraft to launch us off Mars while we're exploring the moon. There's a lot in our favor right now. I'm going to shorten things up. Jim Bridenstine, I could talk to you more about why I think he's wonderful for NASA right now. Please ask me questions about him in the future. And Bill Gerstenmaier, I can't say enough positive about him. This is not your mother and father's lunar program. If you only have to pull out your cell phone to recognize how quickly things are changing, we cannot latch on to a technology today for a program that's going to last decades and stay committed to that. We have to let it develop and pull in new things. And because of that, we have a very open architecture. And what we're doing now as NASA is trying to make sure we get the right standards so that people understand how to interoperate with that for operations and future technologies so that we can build on that. We want to have a very bottoms-up architecture that cross-integrates so we can continue to pull in the best ideas from those young people, those really good engineers, and not be trying to force things down from on high. My hope is that someday I'll be talking to my grandchildren and telling them about how when I was a kid, we only had human beings living on the planet. And they'll be just as surprised as I was when my dad told me he grew up on a farm and they didn't have indoor plumbing. I'm very confident that the future, as long as NASA works very well with commercial industry and its international partners, that we have a lot to look forward to. Thank you very much.
Well, Mark, you really did great. Unfortunately, we had a little glitch in our program here, and I was supposed to introduce Bill Bastido. Bill, would you join us up here on stage? Bill was supposed to get to introduce you. And Bill is, of course, come on up here, Bill. Bill is a long-time member of the space community. He worked on the shuttle back in the day. He was the launch package manager for the first element, American Launch 2A, ISS Launch 2A to the space station, worked for Booz Allen, and now comes to us from industry. And so we have industry and the government here together. And so I'm going to let you say what you were going to say real quick about...
I got 2 introductions. This is amazing.
You get 2 introductions.
Wow. I'm
This
going to
is
step
better
off the
than
stage
mine.
just to make it get the right visual.
No, don't go away. Don't go away.
Well,
You got to stand up here.
So the people I'm here with from UTC Aerospace Systems are glad that I'm going to tell everybody this is going to be quick. But I did want to provide at least a perspective from industry about what Mark is talking about, what this whole conference is about how can we get to the day on the other side of the tipping point where we do have a commercial and robust ecosystem going on in low Earth orbit, perhaps on the surface of the moon, perhaps on an asteroid, or perhaps someplace even further away. So as Wayne said, I'm the Director of Business Development for the United Technologies, Aerospace Systems, Civil Space and Sea Systems business. That's a mouthful, but really what it means is we're the company that's been providing life support systems, thermal control systems, power management and distribution systems, and spacesuits to America's space programs since the Apollo program. Everything that's flown has our hardware in it, and we're currently working with NASA and Boeing on SLS, NASA and Lockheed on Orion, and NASA and Boeing on CST-100. We're very proud of what we've learned, and we really want to figure out how to make this bridge happen, where we can go to this place we all want to get to. It's wonderful to be here in New Mexico again to talk about these heady ideas of how does this ecosystem really blossom and come into shape, and how do we actually create business cases that close where commercial operators get more in revenues than they spend in cost in any one year over the long haul. We look forward to that day we look forward to the day when commercial operators develop more spaceflight hardware than governments do. And no offense to our friends at NASA, we want to partner with you forever. As long as you're in the exploration business, we want to go there with you. We certainly think we can help. But as we look at this transition out from where we are to where we want to be, we really think that there's 4 key trends that need to continue. First, launch costs need to continue to come down. That's the enabler to get anything off the planet, and they need to continue to come down. And there's lots of commercial companies now making great advancements and driving the entire industry's costs down. The second thing, though, is the development costs for new systems also need to come down, and they need to come down significantly. The hardware that's been built, especially for human spacecraft and low Earth orbit, has been primarily built once on the International Space Station, and it's very expensive, and we have to figure out how to make it at least half the cost and be able to develop it twice as fast to meet the needs of a commercial ecosystem. And as we try and figure out how to make that work, we think the other key trends are operations and logistics costs have to be driven down. You cannot afford, entities cannot afford 5 and 6 and 7 flights a year to resupply the water and everything else that's needed, food and other things. And then lastly, most importantly, we all have to work together to drive the market demand for space operations up. So to wind this up, I just want to tell you that from our perspective, we're working hard to figure out how to address these challenges. You know, again, the systems need to be cheaper, we have to develop them faster, but they also still need to be safe. They still need to be reliable, and they still need to have very high efficiencies to improve the operations costs. So we're working hard to get there. We want to continue to work with NASA against their exploration objectives, and with each of the companies here on trying to find out what products that they need at what price points to support the business cases they want to have in space. But that's enough about us, and since Wayne's already introduced our friend Mark.
So we're gonna do this. We've got a tag team that I can ask questions to both these guys, and we appreciate UTAS sponsoring this keynote address.
Sure.
And I've got some questions here that are probably going to end your career, Mark, so I'll start with the easy non-policy question. Which did you find easier to unpack, Dragon, Progress, or Cygnus?
By far, the easiest to unpack was Progress because the Russians did it.
International partnership, right?
And honestly, I would say Northrop Grumman's Cygnus was easier to unpack. It's kind of got a larger open volume, but because SpaceX's Dragon vehicle has to return to Earth, it's more robust on the interior. There's a lot more panels that have to be open and closed because it's got to return that cargo back. So it's a little more challenging unpacking Dragon than it is unpacking Cygnus, but for a good reason.
Very good. And I know I was talking to some folks, just got back from Bremen, and the IAC, there was a lot of discussion about international partnerships. What do you see us doing with the Chinese in space?
Next question.
I told you he's a smart man. Okay, well, at least give us your thoughts on international partnership involvement in the future lunar programs.
So honestly, I think we want this program to survive administrations. And Melanie Saunders up at NASA headquarters said something recently that I thought was really important, that international programs survive administrations. And it's essential that we poll, if not for no other reason, to make this last, to stay on course, we've got to have international partners. But also, because the problems are complex, we need to poll in as diverse a set of viewpoints as possible. And the way we approach things is different, the cultures are different, and that's always very helpful.
Good. And UTC, are you guys working on any alleviation to the radiation concern, which is one of the most pressing problems, I think, for deep space exploration?
We aren't really working radiation remediation carefully. I mean, we really focus on life support, which is air and water systems. So obviously we're trying to work to make sure those will continue to operate successfully in whatever trajectory or orbit you end up being in.
Okay. Well, Mark, as an astronaut, does the more severe deep space radiation environment concern you?
Definitely. I think it's something we have to address. Otherwise, I think NASA's got the appropriate safety culture that we're not going to put people into that deep space environment until we've figured out how to buy down that risk. So it concerns me as a technical challenge, not so much as something that I'm afraid of being an astronaut because it exists.
Okay. Very good. Final question, because we're running out of time, but final question. Does NASA think of the moon as primarily valuable for facilitating exploration, science, or commercial development?
All three have to be combined for it to work. There's scientists that are very, very excited about us getting to the surface of the moon as well as the vicinity of the moon. I really see the moon as much like I see low Earth orbit today, that if we're going to go beyond the moon and continue to utilize the moon, we've got to have business development there as well. So I hope that as we progress to further and further destinations, that we don't leave the places behind and abandon them.
So UTC's working on life support systems. How about for a lunar habitat?
Yeah, we're designing our systems of the future to be modular, and so we can scale those things to whatever size is necessary for a small LEO platform, for a large habitat on the surface of the moon. Basically, it's a building block kind of idea. If you have 4 people's worth, you need this much. If you have 8 people's worth, you need twice as much.
Great.
So we're excited to be able to put a family of systems out there that could help everybody.
Very good. Okay, well, I think that's about all the time we have for questions. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Wayne.
Bill.
Yes.
Glad to have you both
Mark,
up here
thanks.
with
I
us.
enjoyed it. Yep.